Science promises progress, but sometimes the path to discovery cuts through horror. These are the real human experiments that sound like fiction, except every one of them happened. Unit 731, Japan's Factory of Death. Unit 731, operated by the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II, was a facility in Harbin, China, designed for extreme human experimentation. Prisoners, mostly Chinese civilians, and prisoners of war, were subjected to surgeries without anesthesia. Doctors deliberately infected them with diseases like plague, anthrax, and cholera to study progression and mortality. Victims were also exposed to frostbite, dissected alive to examine organ damage, and injected with toxins. Limbs were frozen solid and thawed just to watch the skin die. Others were exposed to grenades or flamethrowers so doctors could analyze combat wounds. Entire villages were bombed with plague, infested fleas to test biological weapons. Every death was recorded with precision. Body temperature, heartbeat, time of organ failure. When Japan surrendered, the unit destroyed evidence, but U.S. intelligence secretly granted immunity to its scientists in exchange for their data. Unit 731 turned medicine into a weapon and science into a crime scene. Next, testicular transplants at San Quentin Prison. In the 1940s, behind the walls of San Quentin Prison, surgeons began a strange and unsettling experiment, transplanting testicles between inmates. They claimed it was about rejuvenation, hormones, and vitality. In reality, it was a desperate mix of science, ego, and human trial. Donor organs were grafted into recipients as doctors tracked hormone levels, fertility, and tissue response. Blood was drawn, glands were monitored, and surgical notes filled with sketches, photos, and hormone charts. Some subjects were injected with ground-up animal glands in an attempt to boost masculinity. Others underwent adrenal transplants to test mood and energy changes. Prisoners were measured for libido, aggression, and even personality shifts over months. Officially, the data fed early endocrinology research, exploring organ function and hormone transfer. But the deeper story feels more like human alchemy, a quest to manipulate biology itself. The San Quentin testicle experiments remain one of medicine's most bizarre chapters, where the promise of science blurred into the shadows of obsession. Next, Nazi twin experiments. At Auschwitz, Dr. Joseph Mengele, the infamous Angel of Death, greeted arriving twins with a smile and a clipboard. He wasn't saving them, he was selecting them. He measured every inch of their bodies, injected dyes into their eyes, and deliberately infected one twin to compare how the other reacted. When one died, the other was often killed too, so organs could be examined side by side. The idea? To prove Aryan genetic superiority and accelerate twin-based population growth. Mengele's lab became a hybrid of clinic and torture chamber, filled with charts, skulls, and jars, labeled with names instead of numbers. The Nazi twin experiments exemplify the extreme. It left a dark legacy in genetics research. The pseudo-scientific obsession with heredity and control, conducted under the guise of advancing racial science. Next, Project 4.1 at Marshall Islands. After the 1954 Castle Bravo nuclear test, Project 4.1 studied radiation exposure among residents of the Marshall Islands, especially Rongelap and Utrecht. Islanders suffered nausea, burns, hair loss, and blood disorders from fallout. U.S. researchers conducted blood tests, biopsies, and long-term health monitoring to study radiation's impact on growth, organs, and reproduction. Some residents were relocated, observed for years, and tested for cancer and thyroid disease. Scientists also sampled local soil, food, and water to track radioactive contamination. Every symptom and test result was logged to map radiation's short and long-term effects. Though it yielded key safety data, Project 4.1 remains controversial, blurring the line between medical aid and human experimentation, as islanders became unwitting subjects in a study of nuclear fallout's true human cost. Next, the Willowbrook Hepatitis Study. At the Willowbrook State School in New York, between 1956 and 1971, parents were told that enrollment in a hepatitis program could get their disabled children better care. What they weren't told was that the program involved feeding kids extracts from hepatitis-infected stool, the goal to study disease progression and develop vaccines. Children developed jaundice, fever, and fatigue, all carefully documented. While the study generated valuable data for vaccine development, it raised serious ethical questions about consent, exploitation, and vulnerability. Parents often consented under pressure or necessity, but the children themselves had no say. The data was clean, the ethics, not so much. Next, the Tuskegee Project. In 1932, hundreds of poor black men in Alabama were promised free health care for what doctors called bad blood. In reality, the U.S. Public Health Service was secretly studying the effects of untreated syphilis. Participants were offered medical checkups, meals, and burial insurance, all to maintain the illusion of care. Even after penicillin became the known cure in the 1940s, they were deliberately denied treatment. Researchers instead documented their suffering paralysis, blindness, heart failure, while the disease spread to their wives and children. The truth finally surfaced in 1972 after a whistleblower exposed the study. The Tuskegee experiment remains one of medicine's darkest chapters, proof that sometimes the sickness lies not in the patient, but in the system itself. Next, Holmesburg prison experiments, the skin farm. Between 1950s and 1970s, Philadelphia's Holmesburg prison turned into something closer to a human laboratory. Inmates were paid a few dollars to test lotions, though what they were really testing were chemical agents, dioxins, and radioactive compounds supplied by dermatologists and pharmaceutical companies, eager to study absorption, toxicity, and skin reactions. The substances ranged from industrial chemicals and adhesives to cosmetics and steroids. Researchers meticulously recorded the results: burns, blisters, rashes, photographing each painful progression. In some cases, inmates' skin peeled away in sheets. The experiments contributed to advances in dermatology and cosmetic testing, but for the men who volunteered, their own skin became a commodity. As one participant later described it, they were selling pain by the square inch. Next, plutonium and radiation experiments, America's atomic secret. In the early atomic era, the U.S. government conducted experiments exposing civilians and soldiers to radioactive isotopes, including plutonium, to study absorption, metabolism, and radiation effects. Participants often did not know they were part of experiments. Some were injected with small amounts of plutonium or uranium, while others were placed in rooms with controlled radioactive contamination to measure inhalation and external exposure. Researchers tracked how isotopes spread through bones, organs, and blood over months. Charts recorded metabolism rates, cell mutations, and organ decay. But the patients died unaware they'd become test reactors. When their files were declassified decades later, the details read less like science and more like an autopsy report written in advance.